Hello and welcome back to Bioclass Bites. In this video, we are going to talk about characteristics of life. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. These are the unit and lesson titles for this video series, but in this video, we are going to focus on characteristics of life. What is life and what do you mean when you use this term? In order for you to answer that question, let's try out this pop quiz. Imagine a situation in which two astronauts encounter a large amorphous blob on the surface of a planet. How would they determine if it is alive or not? What do you think? Pause this video and write down your answers. The astronaut might test the blob for characteristics of life. One of the first things they might do is to see if the blob will move or not. It's because we associate movement with life. We see animals and humans moving around and they are all considered living things. But we also have plants and mushrooms, sponges and corals which remain rooted to their substrate, but they are living things. So movement might not be a good diagnostic of life because we also see non-living objects such as cloud moving across the sky or a paper being carried by the wind, but they are non-living things. So the criterion for movement might be true for some living things, but it's not sufficient to describe all living things. The astronaut might prod the blob to see if it responds. All living things respond to stimuli. So we see plants growing towards the light. We see animals retreating from pain, such as fire. Humans flinch when there's sudden movement, and all those. However, not all stimuli produce responses. So even if you kick a tree, or you sing to a hibernating bear, or even if you talk to a mushroom growing from a log, you might not solicit any response from them. So, criterion wise, sensitivity could be a good characteristics of living things, but it's still not expressed by every organism, so it might not be adequate to define life. The astronaut might attempt to kill the blob. All living things eventually die no matter how long their lifespan is. We actually have turtles that can live up to 150 years old. We have sharks that can live up to 400. Some sea sponges can live up to 10,000 years, but eventually they die. However, death is not easily distinguished from disorder. One example is a car that breaks down has not died because it was never alive. It is actually quite a circular argument. Um, it's also quite difficult to prove if something is living or not just by killing it. For example, a seed of a tree could remain dormant for many years. However, it only germinates or it only turns into a plant once you put it on soil. But for the longest time that it is not planted on a soil, it might look to some as already a dead organism. However, it is just in its dormant form. And killing something just to establish that it is a living thing is actually quite counterproductive. So that's not a good test to determine if it is alive or not. So unless one can detect life, death is actually a meaningless concept and quite inadequate in defining organisms. Finally, the astronauts might dissect the blob to see if it is complexly organized. Even all living things are complex, and even the simplest cell could be made up of complicated organelles, as you can see here in this example. Um, However, we also have a lot of non-living things that are also complex in their structure, such as this smartphone. So as you can see, both of these examples are made up of complicated internal structures, but that does not mean that both of them are alive. Thus, complexity might be a good criterion of life, but it is not sufficient to describe all living things because we have non-living things who are also as complex as living organisms. This just brings us to the same question earlier. So what is life? What do we mean when we use this term? Let me present to you what we consider the true criteria of life. So these are conclusive bases that will allow us to determine if something is a living thing or not. So first, it must be made up of cells, one or more cells. Then it must have the ability to grow and metabolize. It must have the ability to reproduce. It must have an ability to maintain its healthy internal environment. And it must have the ability to pass on its genetic information to its offspring and eventually to evolve. Here are some properties of life. Mind you, they vary depending on the source, but they have certain similarities. So first, order. Okay, um, according to this, sunflower illustrates the highly ordered structure that characterizes life. Um, Evolutionary adaptation, we've mentioned that. Adaptations that evolve over countless of generations by reproductive success are the ones that are passed on to the offspring that are best suited to their environment. So regulation, for example here, regulation of blood flow through the blood vessels of this jackrabbit's ears, maintain a constant body temperature, so that refers to homeostasis. So reproduction, okay, organisms are capable of reproducing their own kind. Sometimes they still consider response to environment. For example, Venus flytrap closes in response to environmental stimulus. Then we've mentioned growth and development. So inherited information carried by the gene controls the patterns of growth and development in living organisms and energy processing. So organisms such as this butterfly obtains fuel in the form of nectar and will use chemical energy to power its flight and other work. First is cellular organization. All living things are composed of one or more cells. Organisms that are only made up of one cell is called unicellular, while organisms that are made up of multiple cells are called multicellular. So complex arrangement of molecules make up the organelles of the cell. Then eventually those organelles could become the actual cell. Then cells working together form tissues and so on and so forth. This lesson will be tackled in depth with our next video on levels of organization. So we define cellular organization as having components that could make up a cell and how they are arranged inside of it. So all living things are made up of cells. It's one of the tenets or principles of the cell theory. So here you just have to get a cell sample from an organism, look at it under the microscope and see if it is actually made up of cells. If it is, then we can say that object or creature is actually a living organism. In this illustration or microscope image, we can see here several paramecia, plural of paramecium. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 paramecia here. And inside, they are ingested with several yeast cells. So inside this cell are more cells of yeast. Okay? The yeast that are stained red are enclosed within membrane-bound sacs called digestive vacuoles. So here, this is considered a living thing because it's even if it's a unicellular organism, it's still made up of cells, and inside you can see here multiple yeast cells. All living things have the ability to grow and metabolize. Living things can assimilate energy and use it to grow in a process called metabolism. We define growth as a biological unfolding of events involved in an organism from changing from a simple to a more complex level, as shown here in growth of this plant from seed to a seedling, and development of a human female from a newborn baby into an adult female. All living things are capable of such changes. Also, living things are capable of metabolism or organic processes that they perform that are necessary for life. So examples of those metabolic processes are digestion, respiration, circulation, excretion, reproduction, and others. All living things are capable of reproduction. So reproduction is a fundamental feature of all known life, And each individual organism, such as you and I, are results of reproduction. Some organisms live for a very long time, but no organism can live forever. So therefore, it is important for reproduction to happen in order to perpetuate the species. Examples of reproduction are seen here of two cuttlefish mating. By the way, cuttlefish is my favorite invertebrate because they have such good camouflage abilities, and look at them, they're so cute. Here we also see examples of pollination in plants, either in self-pollination, wherein the plant fertilizes its own egg cell, um, while here in cross-pollination, the pollen will come from the other plant or the other flower to pollinate um, the ovaries. Since all living things die, life without reproduction is impossible. So we can actually conclude that all living things are results of reproduction and all living things are capable of reproduction. All living things maintain an internal environment different from their surrounding. We call that homeostasis, or a self-regulating process by which an organism tends to maintain stability while adjusting to conditions which are important for its survival. Let's look at the example of crocodiles from the subfamily Crocodilinae. By using temperature variations in their surrounding or by remaining cold when they do not need to move, reptiles, such as these crocodiles, can save considerable amounts of energy compared to endothermic animals of the same size. Um, in the past, people would classify animals as warm-blooded or cold-blooded. However, there are more appropriate terms for that. In this example, crocodiles are categorized as ectothermic organisms, which means that they maintain their temperature based on the factors outside their body. Like what the description I've mentioned, if their body is too hot, they just have to go to a body of water or to a river or stream, and so that they will be able to cool their body down. And when it is too cold, they just have to sit under the sun, and then their body will become warmer. Unlike humans, which are mammals, which are commonly endothermic animals, we can maintain our own internal heat. For example, we can maintain our own internal temperatures. For example, when it is too hot, our body's reaction is to perspire and release sweat along our skin. So as those droplets of water evaporate, they take with them heat coming from the body. Thus, it cools the body down. And when it's too cold, if you've noticed, our abdominal muscles would tend to rub against each other, which will cause the body to shiver and generate heat specifically for the internal organs to save it from the excessive cold. So organisms use either their own body or the environment to maintain their temperature, and that's just one example of homeostasis. If homeostasis is successful, life continues, the organism survives. If it is unsuccessful, it could lead to disaster, disease, or even death of that organism. All organisms possess a genetic system that is based on a complex linear molecule called DNA, which stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Because of this, all living things are capable of passing on their traits to the next generation, and that's how we actually define the word heredity. So, through heredity, variations between individuals can accumulate over time, and this will eventually cause species to evolve through natural selection. In this image, we have here a pedigree analysis for two traits in humans. The first one is widow's peak. So that's having this shape of your hairline that can be inherited. And if you do not have widow's peak, then you just have this regular hairline. So in this pedigree, we see that the gene for widow's peak is passed on from first generation from the grandparents to the second generation, the parents and the uncles, and then eventually to the third generation, the actual sisters or the actual people that we are looking at. So one of the two sisters inherited the gene for widow's peak, therefore she was able to manifest the phenotype for it. Then another example here is for attached um, earlobe versus free earlobe. So the gene for Attached earlobe is present amongst the generation of the grandparents and eventually passed on to the second generation of the parents. And then it was inherited by one of the two sisters having this trait of attached earlobe. So this is how, this is an overview on how heredity occurs. Because of heredity and then eventual accumulation of characteristics, evolution accounts for the unity and diversity of life in our planet. So we see here different variations of birds. So we have here hawk, a red-shouldered hawk, okay, a European robin, an American flamingo, and a gentoo penguin. So even if they are all birds, they have different characteristics, different traits, different physical appearance that allow them to survive in their environment. So these shows us very diverse lifestyles based on their characteristics. So the scientific explanation for the unity, okay, or the connection of all living things and the diversity of all the living things on our planet is best studied through the prism of evolution. Okay, so the adaptations that they eventually have and pass on to their offspring is called evolution, okay, or the gradual process of that is called evolution. So the concept of evolution is that organisms living on Earth today are the modified descendants of their common ancestors. We will learn more about this when we reach this unit in the fourth quarter. So to summarize everything that we have discussed so far, I recommend this video from Amoeba Sisters entitled Characteristics of Life. Linked in will be found in the description below. Same thing here from Study Biology, a video explaining to us the importance of studying biology. For your reflective journal log, I recommend this video from Kurgizast entitled What is Life? Is Death Real? Hopefully, this video could summarize everything that we have tackled for the first two videos into the introduction to biology. That ends our video. I hope you learned something new. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Till next time, goodbye.